You're listening to Nakedly Examined Music, a podcast about songs and songwriters. My name is Mark Linsenmeyer. My guest for episode 196 is Michael Gira, best known for his 15 or so albums as Swans, which he started in the early 80s, but he's also put out some albums under his own name and as the Beggar Lovers, and for nearly a decade as Angels of Light. You're right now listening to Screenshot by the Swans from To Be Kind 2014. We're going to discuss Michael Is Done, a song from their brand new album, The Beggar, and look back to the last album, Leaving Meaning from 2019, to the song It's Coming, It's Real, and then all the way back to the very first release, Filth from 1983. The song is Power for Power. If you've noticed the long running time for this episode, it's not because we talked for so long, it's because the song that we're going to leave you with at the end, called The Beggar Lover, and then in parentheses 3, takes up most of the second disc of this 2-disc set at nearly 44 minutes by itself. For more information, see swans.bandcamp.com. For more on this podcast, see nakedlyexaminedmusic.com. And to support the effort, go to patreon.com/nakedlyexaminedmusic. I will start off by playing a little bit of Screenshot from To Be Kind 2014, just because that's your most popular song, over 4 million views or something like that, at least according to Spotify. Did you have any idea? Is there anything special about
I got $6.50 for that.
It seems nice. Besides being good intro music, it seems pretty representative, even though we're looking at a decade old now, but of your modern style. We're going to get very soon to the new one, The Beggar. I know it's been a few years, 2019, since the last one. Can you say a little about the recent developments? Obviously, we had the pandemic, but I mean, is that one of the things that determined the sound of The Beggar, or did you kind of wait till that was over so you could get together with other musicians for that?
We had planned extensive touring for the album Leaving Meaning. And then, like a lot of other people, we had to cancel our tour. We waited, and then we rebooked the tour, and then we had to cancel again. And then we did the same thing once again. And at that point, I said, this is pretty awful, and it's not going to change anytime soon. So I decided that I would switch modes from being a touring musician into writing a new album. So I just started writing. And I guess over the next year and a half or so, I wrote the songs for this album. And then I think as I started to finish the songs, it became possible to then travel and record. And so I came to Berlin, where I now am, and recorded The Beggar with my friends. We rehearsed for a month beforehand, so that we could learn to play the songs with some kind of openness and feel rather than just try to recite the chord progressions that I had made, and built them into something which felt performed and hopefully had a measure of something that could lead you into someplace else in them.
Mm-hmm.
And now we are rehearsing to tour, and the songs, playing many of the songs from The Beggar as well as from Leaving Meaning, they have transmuted into something else entirely, which I'm very pleased with. They've expanded and grown and changed considerably. And I look at the music now as it's always shifting and always changing. The songs are just the vaguest blueprint for how to move forward and find some new way to make sound.
Is it pretty much the same lineup now? I know Bill Rieflin has passed away, who I'm not sure if he played in the last album, but I know he was somebody that would do overdubs for you with some regularity.
Bill was a great friend and a tremendous resource.
Mm-hmm.
The high point of that period was getting together with Bill, and his sense of humor and his ability to bring his personality, his joyous personality into the music was much appreciated by me. And he brought all kinds of nuances and textures and depth into the material that wouldn't have existed otherwise. And it's a tremendous loss, but we move on. So we're doing well with this configuration.
He was never on this podcast. I didn't get around to him, but we had other folks from the -5 and many King Crimson related folks on here over the years. So that was definitely an interesting brain that I wanted to pick. But let's turn back to your brain. The song that I picked from the new album was Michael Is Done, which is not the last song on the album. So it does not seem to be an announcement of the end of your career, for instance. Can you say a few introductory words about that before we insert it in full?
Well, like all the songs on the record, I wrote it on acoustic guitar, and it sounds much different than it did alone in my room, for instance. I mean, what interests me on that song is the middle section, just kind of expansive guitar section. But the lyrics, I wrote this song called Julie Is Done. Same words, different title. I was about to discard it because it didn't make any sense to me. And then I don't know why, but I just thought, well, I'll just change it to Michael Is Done. And then the song made sense.
All right. Well, that's a good hermeneutic clue that it's not revealing things about, this is a ironic take on what the critics say about your work. No, it was written with a generic name.
Yeah, which is, kind of silly. Like I might as well said Donald Is Done, But when I changed it to Michael, the words made sense to me. And the words, I suppose, are these kind of conundrums that I create, these kind of mental knots. And I'll leave it at that. But that's how they function for me.
Now Michael is done, stripped bare of pretense, soaking his sheets while counting insects. He's a grid on the sun, he's the hate in the love. Every hole is a leak when Michael does speak, but Michael will win. There's a flame on his tongue, his words are burnt meat to muscle and red. Now Michael will cloak every raft in his moat. To speak is to choke, to leave is to come. When the other has come, then Michael is done, is done, is done, is done, is done, is done, is done. Is done, is done, is done, is done, is done. breaking his lens. He is breaking his hands. Growing wings from his back. Michael sinks in his sack. When Michael is gone, some other will come. When the other has come, then Michael is done, 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 is done.
Of course, the reason I picked this is because of that. You're referring to as the middle section, but it almost sounds like this is going to be the instrumental outro. But then you throw on sort of a coda, another verse at the end. But definitely when it opens up, the fact that it has that blatant dynamics as opposed to many of the songs that kind of dwell in a single space and maybe throb and grow a little and come back, but like don't have this marked, now the orchestra has come in.
Right.
You said you wrote this on acoustic guitar. So was that just loud strumming during that section? Like I don't even hear in the earlier parts. Is there even acoustic guitar left? There's your tremolo guitar, but...
That's Christoph playing, but there's some acoustic guitar in there somewhere strumming. But that middle section had I forget, 6 different acoustic guitar chords. One would last for a while and shift to another. And it kept a vestige of that. But once I start working with musicians, things change. I just work with intuition and work with the input of others. And then I guide things from that point, and it gradually morphs into what you end up hearing.
When it does actually hit a second chord, it's very dramatic. And then you feel like the gravity is going to take us back to the first chord pretty quickly, but it just lets itself live on that second chord for a while.
There's lots of different iterations of that within that chord too, which is one thing I enjoy about when it reaches that state, the music, is that if you listen carefully, it's always shifting.
So that's by design in the demo, not even necessarily just the fact that you have talented musicians. Once you put a keyboardist and say, there's going to be pretty much one chord over this. Of course, they're jazz trained. They're whatever. They're not going to just play the single chord.
And so things just gradually evolve. Yeah, I think there were 6 different chord iterations in that section. And then they kind of blended together, but you can still hear the shifting.
Well, I liked having a screenshot a little before this because we got to hear, a very deliberate, okay, we start with a little bass riff and then we add another little thing. We add another little thing. Whereas in the first half of this song, it's much more subtle than that, right? That you've got your parallel octave vocals going and just the light is starting to stream out and it's so gradual over that several stanzas worth of stuff. How orchestrated was that?
Well, it started out with my guitar and voice. And then as it happened, I thought that the acoustic guitar sounded really stupid. So I just removed it. And my voice continues with the melody. I was singing exactly along with the notes on the acoustic guitar. So once I removed the acoustic guitar from that first and last section of the song, it made more sense to me. And it has Christoph Hahn's lap steel and Larry Mullen's mellotron. And I think there's some xylophone bells in there or something, as well as my wife singing with me.
Okay.
And that kind of felt like a honest orchestration there. It didn't rub me the wrong way, so I kept it like that.
Did you record with her at the same time, or was it you and then her overdubbing?
Oh, yeah, she did it afterwards.
Okay. There's one place in the whole song where you decide you're going to say other, and she's going to say other, which is what you're doing in the rest of the song. I didn't know if that was just something you let go and said, oh, that's fine, or whether that was like a deliberate, let's nail this word.
No, it just happened. It just happened. And I like that.
How much of a director are you, or was this just a matter of rehearsing this a lot in terms of, okay, when we have to have a new thing, we have to have the little tinkle percussion enter here. It sounds very deliberate and orchestrated, at least that you pointed.
I certainly don't write it out, but people play their parts that we've worked out in rehearsals. And then that, just like with my acoustic guitar, I hear tones while I'm playing these chords that evoke other instruments. The same thing could be said as after we get a performance onto tape, then that performance, when you put it up in the monitor, is loud. I hear other things that need to happen. And then I start thinking about other things that can happen. Often other people in the group will have ideas, of course, as well. And I'll listen to them and use them or not. But That's how it happens. It's just a slow process of growth.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really like the subtlety in that. Let's actually play. I'm going to insert a clip here from 2 minutes in, which is when it opens up like crazy there. Can you say a little about that? Okay, now the whole orchestra is going to come out, the choirs of angels, and it's got some sort of Beach Boys-y, we're going to have some sleigh bells or something to thicken that out. Can you say something about your choice of orchestra there?
Well, there's, I don't know how many tracks, tons of female vocal. Not my wife in this case. There's a couple of very talented singers that I met here in Berlin that I had sing the female vocals. And then I sang as well in that part, singing long sustained notes. And there's piano, there's vibraphone, there's xylophone. There's tons of tracks of lap steel guitar. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of sorting that all out when we mix and trying to have it have some trajectory that leads you along. To me, that section seems kind of joyous and I like it. There's even major chords involved, which is unusual for me. There's a couple spots on this record that have frank and deliberate major chords.
Well, and some nice, distinct, prominent bass lines in that section. Like that's the most obvious. Okay, now here's a new section within that is, okay, the bass line is switched to something else. It is, generally holding down eighth notes, but it's the thing that draws my attention at least.
Yeah, that's Chris Pravdika playing the bass on that. He's a great bass player.
And did you have any of those bass lines in mind, or he just came up with stuff?
There was a different bass part on the initial recording, and I listened to it repeatedly. And by that time, we were not in Berlin anymore. I was trying to figure out what the song was lacking, that section. It seemed kind of plodding. And I just started thinking about what it could have to make it more propulsive. Mm-hmm. So I just started looking around and I listened to gospel music. I listened to the bass on the gospel music. I found a song somewhere online, and then I sent a link to that to Chris, and then I sang him some ideas for bass. And then I said, just take it from there and do what you like. This is the idea. And then he created this bass part.
So does it still have some vestige of the old part, which I assume was, some just sort of...
It was just playing right with the kick drum, and it wasn't playing the eighth notes. But that's what it needed, was the eighth notes, now that you mention it. So I gave Chris guidance, but then he took it and made it his own, which is how it should be. It worked really well.
Play one other chunk from there. Just that we're adding in like it seems like every element of it, if it has movement, it's pretty deliberate movement to make it at least possible to combine all this massive stuff. Like we're going to have some very definite melodies, very two-note in this case, melody in there. So it just sounds like, a bunch of erector set pieces or something rather than a bunch of people jamming. It's not Dixieland. It's the antithesis of that.
Well, Dixieland's pretty highly orchestrated, but this is orchestrated indefinitely, but it just happens to be that it's orchestrated by intuition along the way.
Yes, I guess I was just thinking the busyness of Dixieland, that it's often, even if it's written out, it's in the instrumental breaks, a lot of movement. Anyway.
Problem with my recording sessions is that there are so many tracks. And that's why I'm really grateful to have this engineer, Ingo Kraus, with whom I've been working a lot for the last, 8 years or something, to sort out these tracks, because you have to give things up, and I'm the kind of person, I don't want to give up. I want more. I want more. But you can't, because one thing cancels out another. So it's just finding the things to emphasize. But as I said, Christoph recorded, 6, 8 lap steel tracks. Oh. Some just open, I don't remember what key that's in. I think D probably. Open D chords, and then other ones where he moves the slide along the slide guitar and creates a little melody. And then it was just a matter of choosing which ones work on a particular section to have it build. And then Dana Schechter, who's the other bass player in this group right now, she played some piano on this too, which you hear come in towards the end. And then Ben Frost played something too. I don't remember what he played on this, but.
So there actually are things that are muted that in terms of all those lap steel parts, he didn't just because that's what I kind of like to do is just make it quiet. Just leave it in there. Somebody went through the trouble. If it's this thick anyway, maybe just make it sound like a crowd.
Stuff that's still there and isn't maybe loud still affects the way other things are perceived. Sometimes, yes, you just need to ditch something, but other times you can just leave it sort of there. And that's Ingo's territory, because he's a master of sorting out frequencies.
Well, and with all these choir sustained vocals, was that like you each doing it a few times and then maybe digitally making more of them, or?
No, I don't do that. It's all performed.
Well, I guess by digitally, I mean, even just adding a chorus effect sort of makes it sound like there's more than the three.
I mean, there's reverb, of course. We use plate reverb and some delays, but I don't know. Maybe there's 12 tracks of female vocals, maybe more.
I guess why not? It's digital. There's no limit built into the technology.
What I did in the old days when I only had tape was I would record 12, 20 tracks of female vocals and bounce them down. Part of the impetus for recording female vocals with these loud guitars is to accentuate, to bring to the fore the harmonics and the sustain from the guitars, is to make the sustain that's in the guitars sound more prominent. I do that a lot. There's oftentimes you can hear, say, from the album The Glowing Man, there's these big sustained guitar sections. There's actually lots of vocals in there bringing out the sustain in the guitars. And that's the kind of thing I hear when I'm alone in my room playing these chords over and over. I hear these sustains and notes that aren't even being played. I guess they're harmonics. I just call them ghost notes. You know how if you repeat a chord over and over, perhaps voicing it differently, sounds start to hover over the chord that aren't being played. Mm-hmm. There's a great record by Charlemagne Palestine called Strumming Music. And he's playing two Bosendorfer pianos, I guess, simultaneously. He's sitting between them and he's playing these open chords, arpeggiated open chords over and over, gradually moving around on the keyboard. And as you listen to the piece, these amazing choirs appear, and they're just the sustain and the overtones that are created by the constant hammering of these notes. That's what I live for, is hearing those things.
Any thought about, again, initially the structure spoke to me such that you've got this little vocal thing and then it opens up and just sails off into the sunset. But you felt, oh, no, not only do we need a little coda, but it has to have that very sudden snap to the coda, which I love. Is there something about the logic of the lyrics that requires you to have that end part, or is it a purely musical decision?
It was a decision based on the dynamics of the song. Mm-hmm. But there is a little bridge there. And that is probably, again, I don't know, 16, 20 tracks of Dana Schechter, all the band, Larry Mullins, Phil Puleo, Christoph Hahn, and I may have forgotten someone. Oh, and Christopher Pravdika, reciting the words to the song.
Okay.
Backwards.
It sounded like it's a crowd mumbling something, but that's funny that there's an actual...
Reading the lyrics multiple times, starting in different places in the lyrics backwards. I didn't turn it around and make it repeat backwards. They read them backwards.
Yeah, that's a fun little thing to have it dissolve to that and then snap to the, okay, we're back at the beginning of the song, so we can start where we began, more or less.
Yeah, so it needed a bridge there, but I couldn't make them too prominent because I think they would just be hokey. But just having those talking voices come in there, I thought made a nice psychological bridge from one section to the other.
Now, you mentioned these. I don't want to spoil any of the lyrics. We don't have to talk line by line about anything. You had said that these were all sort of little conundrums, and I'm trying to make sense of any of them. Like, for instance, the second to last one, while cracking his lens, he's breaking his hands, growing wings from his back. Michael sinks in his sack. So the growing wings, what it's like, I'm becoming angelic, but no, it's sinking down. I'm not sure. Is there some literal?
I like phrases that you make a statement and then the next statement nullifies that statement. So you're left in this kind of state where it's vibrating and you can't figure out which one's true. It's an emblem of how consciousness works.
Okay. And it does sound like thematically, the fact that you, with this other part that I broke, some other will come. Are you just thinking on the level of words and their, I don't want to say their colors, because clearly it's not just the sonic appearance of the words, is something about their up and down, about the actual semantics of it. But is there any sort of meaning?
To me, the interesting thing about good art or music, words, that is, writing, is that it requires participation from the listener or the viewer or the reader. And you have to do I don't want to say the work, but you have to expend your imagination, the energy of your imagination into gleaning meaning from the work, so that when someone like me answers all the questions for you, it becomes dead meat. And I prefer that people participate on their own. That's not to say that it's this open-ended meaning, but I want them to glean meaning from it on their own.
Sure. And the musical choices certainly feed into that. You know, the fact that you have this repeating is done. If it was supposed to be purely cyclical, you know, it doesn't matter that the individual is done because another will always take their place. Like there would have been potentially a different way of showing that musically, you know, although we are, by ending where we start, we sort of have some of that. Also, just are you going to have the fade go forever? Is it going to go into nothing? Is it going to have a definite stopping point, which it does? Is it going to be sudden? That sort of thing, which at least suggests something about how stark this is going to be. Is it bad to be done in this way?
Well, I don't know. I'm not making a big statement about this. I'm just looking at these phrases and what they kind of imply about thinking.
Well, let's keep thinking. Get the second song out there. It's Coming, It's Real from your last album, Leaving Meaning, 2019. I'm surprised you mentioned gospel with the last one, because this one, the more I listen to it, the more I'm like, wait a second, this is just a really slow psychedelic gospel tune.
Yeah, okay.
Do you have any words of introduction about where you were at in 2018, 2019 when you were doing this?
I don't recall, to be honest. But I mean, I sat down and just like always and came up with a chord structure I liked, and gradually the words, through lots of work and process of elimination and imagination, the words appeared and then the melody appeared. I was thinking about how to orchestrate this, and I happened to watch a movie by Pasolini called The Gospel According to St. Matthew. And in that movie is a song, a wonderful, tremendous song by the folk singer Odetta. And she is singing Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child. And it was recorded at Carnegie Hall in the early 60s, I guess. And she has a full gospel choir behind her. And the sound of that choir, I didn't know this song before seeing that film, but the sound of that choir is just astonishing. So I bought the album on which the song appears, and I listened to it. And I thought, I really want to have not that sound, not those chords, not that music, but that unbelievably open, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a fog of mournful sound. I wanted to have that around this performance. It doesn't sound, I guess, frankly, anywhere near as good as the choir that Odetta had. I mean, if you listen to that, you should listen to that song. Mm-hmm. So Odetta live at Carnegie Hall. Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child. It's like the air is bleeding sorrow. It's just so beautiful. It's like there's 20 seconds of reverb on it. And then that 20 seconds of reverb has more reverb on it. And it's just this human voices just kind of dissipating into the ether. It's just beautiful. So I had become familiar with the work of Anna von Hauswolf, who's a great singer, a Swedish organ player and singer. And she has a great voice. And I had seen her perform once with her sister, Maria, during these really beautiful harmonies. And so I flew them to Berlin, where we were recording this record. And I stacked dozens of tracks of them singing these notes around this song in order to recreate something like the atmosphere that I remembered from that Odetta performance. There's no comparison between the two, but I think that Maria and Anna did a tremendous job, and it's very beautiful. So I was very happy to have them perform on it.
where you lay in the shimmer above, in the rust and the oil, with your mouth full of mud. You run like a child through curtains of rain, in a room made of stone. Your future was made. There's nowhere to run to. You forget where you've been. Your shadow is shrinking in the tightening lands. How many more years? How much time is there left? All the rivers reverse while you counted each step.
Let's stop for just a second and talk about our sponsors. What's the real science behind all the popular UFO claims on television? What's the true history behind today's growing beliefs in Atlantis, the flat earth theory, and ancient aliens? And when you take away the media hype, what do scientists really say about COVID-19 and global warming? Since 2006, the Skeptoid podcast has been revealing the true science, true history, and true facts behind more than 800 of our most popular urban legends and mysteries. Each episode of Skeptoid looks at a famous story you know and reveals the part of it you haven't heard. Check out episodes covering mysteries such as popular ghost stories, famous UFO cases, alternative science claims, cryptids and urban legends, or conspiracy theories. Find out why the truth behind these popular legends is even more interesting. Listen wherever you get your podcast. Just search for Skeptoid, that's Skeptoid, or visit Skeptoid.com for full transcriptions of the entire catalog. So yeah, we're getting a little longer each time. That first song was just over 6 minutes. This one was about 7:40. So it takes its time, but it gives you that space to really have an atmosphere that you can just sink into, and having the choir be such an important part of that. But yes, can you say a little more about your choice of ensemble on this one, the various vibes and lead guitar and stuff?
It's the same people as played on this new album, The Beggar. It's Larry Mullins playing drums and keyboards, mellotron, synthesizer, all kinds of things. And
by ensemble, I don't mean which people. I mean the fact that Larry is playing that set of things rather than some other set of things. You sort of leave those decisions initially up to him. Or do you have like, oh, I want vibes in there somewhere?
Well, Larry's, a symphonic percussionist trained, so he has vibes. And so, of course, I said vibes. Mixing vibes with electric guitars, by the way, is a thankless occupation. It's almost impossible, but I try.
The overtones don't work well together or something? But
if you want the vibes to be heard, they make the guitars small and vice versa. But nevertheless, they're in there. That's Larry playing all the drums and all the symphonic percussion. And then there's a couple tracks with double bass. There's piano, and my acoustic guitar, Christoph's lap steel, which of course is very important.
And again, there's kind of a minimalist approach. So the piano gestures sound like, you're in a jazz bar, but it doesn't add those extra notes. It's just kind of, we're going to have a stylish sounding transition to the next chord, but it's not going to be, we're not going to fill in space.
My friend Paul Wallfish played tons of piano tracks, but we ended up using a very few because they were just nullifying everything else. But
yes, I guess it's the same issue with the vibes or something, unless there's a reason that orchestral percussion fights with a whole orchestra.
The goal, I guess, in the sound of this, since we're being technical, was to make it sound like people were performing there in front of you in a space on a stage, I guess. And there was 2 microphones in the room recording it. Mm-hmm. Not like it's close mic'd and you can pick out every detail. So that's a tough thing to accomplish when it was not recorded in a concert hall. But I mean, we tried to get something of that feel in the production of it.
I really like the loungy feel of this, and you left the acoustic in here. So you didn't decide, because acoustic guitar is not necessarily part of your...
I don't recall if we left that in.
I think it's still strumming throughout. No?
I did this thing on the demo of this where I recorded the guitar and the voice. All the chords are sympathetic to each other. So then I took, say there was a measure of one chord. Instead of having that chord last on the overdub guitar, I had it last half a measure. And I switched to the next chord so that they were constantly overlapping. And it created a really nice effect. Something of that might still be in there, but that was the kind of effect I wanted from the feel of the sound.
Very neat. We haven't talked about your voice and how you choose to set that. So here, I mean, do you remember if this is double tracked or just reverbed? You're sort of sitting at the bottom of your range, singing.
I think it's a single track with reverb, and then I double it in places for emphasis.
Yeah, a couple places one of them will jump up to a higher note for, that you harmonize yourself a little bit, but not throughout. It's just going to be nothing that's going to conflict with what the choir is doing.
I mean, I do this thing, if you want to hear a technical trick. I don't recall that I did it on this song. I'll sing a song and then I'll double it exactly, every sibilant exactly matching, every pulse in the phrase matching. And then I will take that doubled vocal and I will wipe out all the top end from it completely so that there's no sibilance, there's no attack, and it matches precisely and it adds a depth to the sound of the first voice, then pull it back, and it creates kind of a richness to the vocal without it sounding doubled.
Okay. It seems like a lot of trouble to go through when you could just take the track, duplicate it, move one of them forward, a very fraction of a second.
Yeah, I've done that.
So it's like a very slight slapback echo. Do that same thing.
I've done that, but okay. I like the hard way.
Well, and especially if you like the imperfections, because it's not, even if you're trying to match it exactly, it's not going to be exactly, so it
doesn't sound as organic.
Yes, exactly. Do you know, this whole thing is in second person, in the place where you lay, in the shimmer above, and the rust in the oil with your mouth full of mud. Is there a particular kind of, I don't like to use this word, but illocutionary situation? Like, who are you singing to? Do you know what's going on here in terms of the literary device you're using?
I suppose this would be the point of view of someone looking at themselves from outside.
I mean, that's the most penetrating kind of analysis. Like, who would be presumptuous enough to feel that they could read someone else's psyche this closely? But yeah, no, I love doing that on myself, especially then you throw in how many more years, how much time is there left, sort of worries that it's not just analysis, it's insecurities or whatever.
Okay.
And then one of the things that made me, as well as just the feel of it being a gospel thing. And again, it's a minimalist gospel thing. You had these great singers there. There's opening, in an actual gospel tune, somebody's going to go, whoa, 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 whoa. You're going to put some of that in there, but there's none of that.
Yeah, that's not my world. That would be really cheap. Stealing someone else's genre, that's just not me. It's like, what is that Pink Floyd song where they do that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like so cheesy.
And decide one. But then you get to about 3 minutes and reach up for the hand of the glowing half man. It's like, wait, is this psychedelic Jesus, or am I being too literal here? Or asking forbidden questions?
They're just little scenarios that I was thinking about, different ways to look at your existence, I suppose.
Yeah, you mentioned in the last song having the contrast. So when you get to, now we're going to have, your voice is going to get more intense and defiant, rage on, but it's not rage on, stand tall or whatever. It's rage on, helpless, reach out, silent. You're going to have a good thing, a positive and a negative, and just...
Well, that's what I was talking about, where one phrase cancels out the other one.
Yep. That does sound like sort of a gospel trope. Save us, and then the chorus is going to answer you. The choir is going to echo you, but you're not doing that every time. It's just save us, lightless, and then nothing.
Save us formless, save us lightless.
Mm-hmm. Reach out mindless. Anything to read into there?
I suppose if you've ever meditated seriously, you would know what I was talking about.
Yes, there. I was going to say meditation, even though a gospel song does not sound like meditation. Well, when you slow it down this much, it seems a lot of your songs are, if not some sort of pagan worship service, like some sort of meditation. At least that's the vibe I'm getting, which is why they can last any period of time. Like, it's not like it has to wrap up after 3 minutes. It could go 25.
Which I've done.
Yes. And were there versions of this song that, have 4 more verses of lyrics that got crossed out, for instance?
Yeah, I think I cut out some phrases, but the song reached its apogee and then it necessarily had to end. I mean, this isn't the kind of song that could keep going on and on and on and on. It wouldn't make sense.
I mean, it is like the previous song in that you get to the climax. It's just that the climax was instrumental in the last one. Here, it's that part that we were just talking about. And then it has to do something. And in this case, actually, let me play just the very end. Yeah. Any thought about that choice of ending, that we're just going to have it call out into the wilderness and swoop down for one, as opposed to a big amen or...
Just had to end there.
All right. Well, let's turn back the clock all the way. I mean, of course, the band has gone through many phases, and you even put it aside for a decade or so. Power for Power, the song that I picked from your very first album of Filth, 1983. This sounded so different from me initially. Like, oh, you're doing this completely different thing. It's this industrial thing. But actually, no, it's just the guitars are louder, but the phrasing is similar. This is still trying to be beautiful. I feel like the stuff at this point, even though it's doing it in a very gritty way.
The end, where it's repeating at the end. Yeah, it does have some similarities, doesn't it? A lot of that record is just trying to rip your guts out of Yeah, this is different. I have to confess that I don't listen to this music. And so what you're asking me about is 40 years ago, but I will do my best.
Well, I have clips here we can play to refresh you. Or do you have something against? It's not that you just don't listen to it, but you positively don't want to listen to it. Is that the issue?
No, it's just, like all my music, including the new album, once it's done, I can't hear it anymore. It's just like a piece of litter on the street. It's just done. So it's hard for me to invest myself emotionally with it.
is it a double trio? A full decade before King Crimson did it? With 2 basses, 2 drummers, 2 guitarists? Is that what I'm hearing here?
And tapes. There was some tape loops in there that were brought in rhythm with a foot pedal. They were played through an amplifier. That's how they were recorded in the studio too. Yeah, so it was 2 drummers, 2 bass players, and 1 guitarist.
Okay. Make it a triangle. Only one pointy thing at the top. I like it, especially when the drummers, that one, I guess, Jonathan Cain, is more swing oriented than Raleigh Mossimon. Is that his name?
That's correct.
Yes.
That's absolutely correct. Yes.
You get triplets in one part and straight in the other part. And usually that sounds intentional, but sometimes it just sounds like somebody's pummeling you a little bit. What about the 2 basses thing? As you're playing one of the basses, but given this is the beginning of a band, or how long had this been going by the time you recorded this?
Probably a year.
Okay.
With different people coming and going, actually. But I don't recall the logic or the reason for having 2 basses, except that it felt good. I played the bass, that and it was all chords, Mm-hmm. And then the other bass answered it, I think, is how this worked. Yeah, it did a downbeat, I think. The basses would form one big bass sound. We never played in unison. It was usually one of the bass players playing a percussive bit against the other bass player. And that was because of my proclivity at the time for wanting the music to just be supremely loud and physical, and just to feel it in my body when we played it. And by extension, I guess the audience too, although that was not the first concern. And the same with the 2 drummers, just wanted more. And it was based on really simple mechanics, but when we put them all together, they made this one undeniable kind of experience occur.
And in terms of the writing, was it still you're demoing it, or was it Norman Westberg came up with that guitar? So it's basically a jam that you're saying.
Yeah, Norman came up with his parts on his own, that's for sure. I was much less conversant about how to direct someone with their playing in those days, and didn't need to. Norman was great. He was very new in the group, actually, when we recorded this. We had a previous guitarist by the name of Sue Hannell. She was tremendous. She was like Jimi Hendrix or something. But she would never play the same thing twice. And she would hit a sweet spot, and it would just be unbelievable how good it was. And then the next show or rehearsal, it would just be something completely different. And that was kind of, if you want to try to have a basis from which to grow, that doesn't really cut it after a while. So I don't recall if she left or I asked her. I think she just left and she did something else, and she disappeared. Actually, she has disappeared. No one knows where she is. But yeah, she was great. And then Norman came in after that. It wasn't too long before the recording of this record that he had joined.
And did you know what you were doing?
No.
In terms of genre and audience? Okay. I heard, I read Throbbing Gristle, these other comparisons.
It doesn't sound anything like that.
I wouldn't think so.
But I just wanted to make something that felt just undeniable, that, just felt great. People have all these negative associations with it, but to me, it just felt elevating.
So that label, no wave, it just doesn't mean anything. It's just something.
That's a different genre entirely of groups that were in New York City before Swans. And that would have been Teenage Jesus and the Jerks, the Contortions, Lydia Lunch, Theoretical Girls, Glenn Branca and Mars and DNA. All great groups, but much different than this. And they were in New York. And one of the reasons I wanted to move to New York was hearing Brian Eno's produced record, No New York. Just sounded really exciting, and I wanted to be there. But by the time I got to New York, that whole scene was dead. And I suppose we could have been inspired by it in that, just like a lot of punk rock, the notion that you had to really know how to play your instrument in a technical sense was irrelevant. So I picked up the bass and figured out how to make something happen with it. And that became the music. It wasn't like I knew bass riffs or something. I gravitated towards just playing chords, and just slamming them was my pick, and playing them in a particular rhythm. And that made the basis of the material.
Is that because you started on guitar, but were sort of...
I started on bass.
Oh, okay. This was it. This was the beginning of the experimenting.
Yeah.
In terms of the swing part, I was surprised you even admit the term punk, because at least I thought, in addition to the sort of DIY aesthetic of that, you had to play punk fast. This is a deconstruction of punk or something. We're going to play it really slow and grinding.
I don't care about that stuff, but I liked a lot of punk rock. I mean, it got old pretty quick and became predictable. But the ethos of just picking up your instrument and making something happen, that's punk, and also doing it yourself. And don't be reliant on anybody else. Also be fiercely expressive of your own vision. Those are the elements from it that I thought were valuable.
Would you come up with lyrics after the fact with these, or did you have a little notebook that you came in?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I wrote a lot in those days. I had a typewriter and I sat at it and wrote all the time. But I don't recall how these lyrics came about.
There's this sort of command structure of it. Use sex for control. Use power for power. Use hate for freedom. Use money for cruelty. I mean, that clearly is not advocating those things, but it's also not cruelty is bad. It's so it's sort of ironic.
No, it's not really ironic. It's just stating these phrases for their own power that's in them, and you deal with it how you want. A lot of my influence, if you could call it that, in those days was advertising, was the way advertising phrasing works. These short declamatory statements that on the surface say one thing and then underneath try to seduce you into something else, namely consume. So I was interested in that way of using language.
Well, yeah, and that seems like it's carried through. So even Screenshot, when it eventually gets lyrics, is just individual words. Love, child, reach, no pain, no death, no dream, no pain, things that could all be advertising.
That's like if you're interested in, I don't want to talk about my personal stuff, but if you're interested in meditating, say Zen meditation, the things that fall away from your mind when you attempt to reach truth are those things that I list there.
My mind is now trying to connect together those two things, that it does seem like what makes advertising work is that it clings to you, right? It becomes memes. It becomes these things that repeat over and over again and become their own kind of little mantra that you want to either...
It's mind control, but it's not like a cabal of controllers sitting there with puppet strings controlling the populace. They're very skilled at manipulation of consciousness. And what the effect of it is over an entire culture is that it attaches psychic and sexual significance to inanimate objects that you are meant to consume. So it's very effective. And it's trying to peel away the things that matter to one in this mass media, corporate capitalist society that we live in, to separate the images that have glommed onto your consciousness or penetrated your consciousness. To separate those from what's actually true is a difficult thing.
My prime way of writing songs is I walk around until a melody is harassing me so much that I have to freaking do something with it. If it's not so great that it's just going to stick around its own, that's just because I'm old and lazy and I don't sit down and work as much as I did as a young person. But that's very similar to I will have jingles that I heard when I was 7 or whatever that are still in my head, and they sort of play the same role. It could be something I've written myself or a pop song or a jingle, and they all kind of completely divorced, of course, from whatever product that was somebody was trying to sell me in 1977. The way the mind works in terms of these little bite-sized things, which of course has something in common or is used by when you're trying to meditate and actually I'm going to focus on one thing and make that the thing that goes round in circles as opposed to all the random stuff.
Until that thing disappears. Yeah, what you said.
All right. Well, we have reached the point. We're going to introduce a final song to get out of here. And I want to give you some choice based on what we've been talking about. We could do Failure, because we haven't really talked about that transitional period from what you were doing in the 80s to the modern, or we could do an Angels of Light tune like My True Body, which would be a nice intense closer and say, oh, there's something in your life besides Swans, or something else off the new album. What most appeals to you to leave listeners with?
How long is your podcast?
It can be any length. This would be a place to put a long one if we want to.
The piece of which I am the most fond on the album is 44 minutes long, and that's called The Beggar Lover.
Well, let's include it in full. If you don't mind people getting a full third of your album or more, for free through my podcast, they're still going to go and listen to the rest. I'm sure they're going to pay money for the rest.
Whatever. I'm going to die in penury anyway. It doesn't matter.
All right. Well, thanks for doing this. Any final words then to introduce to folks The Beggar Lover, this monumental piece that I'm sure everybody's going to get all the way to the end of?
It's a kind of a long story how that came about, but it's a reference to a piece, an album I made in 1998, I believe, 7 or 8, 98, called The Body Lovers. And that was made in a similar fashion that this is made in.
I noticed this has distinct sections. It's not just like we're going to vamp on the same chord for 40 minutes.
It's created from a variety of disparate sources, which come from all over the damn place.
Is it mostly the same band jamming in various sessions?
It's tracks from the last 3-4 albums, submixes, of different parts, sections remixed, and just through intuition, I grabbed way too much material and put it in Pro Tools, to be frank, and then figured out how to make a piece out of it and to make a trajectory out of it that made sense. And I had these pages of lists of on paper written of sounds and ideas. And I had all these recordings that I had done just with a little handheld recorder. And I had these studio recordings, and I had recordings of my wife reading a story I made, recordings of my then 2-year-old son, and old vocals laid over new tracks. And I created this piece out of disparate elements and made one long, what I consider to be like a film soundtrack out of it. The reason I call it The Beggar Lovers is because that's sort of the similar thing that I did with The Body Lovers.
Well, very nice to have something included here that seems like a fundamentally different way of making music than we've talked about so far, that you are a Pro Tools guy.
And it also contains a thread of the way I may continue with Swans.
Well, such a pleasure to talk to you. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
I really appreciate your interest, and thanks for persisting and coming back again.
slowly, it's taking me over, and eventually, I'll be completely transformed, diffused in the earth, or incinerated and vaporized. It's in the food I eat, in the air I breathe. It's in the people I love, and they frighten me. I can see a black shadow shimmering just beneath their skin. Despite my love for them, there's nothing I can do for them, nor is there anything they can do for themselves. It's slowly encroaching, relentless. Its appetite is endless and will never be filled.
reach it, but won't touch it, I contain it, but release it. I unfold it, but won't see it. I
Thanks so much to Michael. What he is referring to at the end, if you even remember that from before this lengthy song about my persistence, was this was one of the few interviews that I completely lost when we tried to do this after his last release in 2019. The audio just didn't save, so that was a wonderful hour of conversation that is lost to the world, and it didn't seem wise to try to do it again right then, or at least Michael didn't want to. So now with his new album out, yay, we made it happen. I hope you will listen to some Swans music. There's a lot of good stuff in the catalog. You can browse it all at swans.bandcamp.com. And of course, I would love, if you enjoyed this episode, for you to go to nakedlyexaminedmusic.com or look Nakedly Examined Music up on the streaming service of your choice if you're not actually subscribed to the podcast. My next interviews are with Bonjo Noah from African Head Charge, a very awesome groovy band, and I just now talked to Chris Stamey, famed of the DBs. He worked with Alex Chilton. He was in the Golden Palominos with Michael Stipe and Jack Bruce and other people. And that was one of the most music theory-oriented interviews that I've ever had. Hope you'll come back. So long, everybody. Keep on musicking. Until next time, this is Mark Linton Meyer signing off.